reconnection, divorce, and the one that got away. Hello. I need some advice. It's a strange thing to admit asking for advice on something that feels so deeply personal, so entangled with who I am and who I've become. But life, it seems, has a way of circling back to unresolved moments, and here I am, standing face to face with a past I thought I had buried long ago. A bit of context, so you understand where this all began. I met him when I was 17. 17, a strange age to meet someone who would alter the trajectory of your life in ways you wouldn't fully comprehend for years. Back then, I was just a girl teetering on the edge of adulthood, filled with insecurities I couldn't name and a desperate need to prove myself to the world. I wasn't naive enough to believe in fairy tales, but I wasn't hardened by reality yet either. I existed somewhere in between, in that delicate space where everything feels possible and yet nothing feels secure. And then, there was him. He wasn't the type of boy you forget easily. He had this presence, calm, steady, and utterly unshakable. I remember feeling both drawn to and intimidated by him. He was charming in that quiet way, with eyes that seemed to see far beyond the surface of things. There was a kindness in his smile, but there was also something deeper, something I couldn't quite place. He made me feel seen. And that terrified me. Because the truth was, I didn't feel good enough for him. At 17, I was a mess of contradictions. Outwardly, I wore confidence like a mask and armor to shield me from the world. But inside, there was a constant whisper, "You're not enough. You will never be enough." I carried that whisper like a weight, letting it shape my decisions, my relationships, and, ultimately, my future. So, when he showed interest in me, I panicked. I couldn't let myself believe that someone like him could genuinely want someone like me. Surely, he'd see through the cracks sooner or later. He'd see the flaws, the doubts, the insecurities. And when he did, he'd leave. So, instead of waiting for him to figure it out, I did the one thing I knew how to do. I pushed him away. I thought, better to hurt now than later. Better to control the narrative than to risk being left behind. I remember the day I walked away. I told myself it was for the best, that I was saving myself from inevitable heartbreak. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was scared. I was scared of being vulnerable, of letting someone in, of admitting that I wanted something as terrifying as love. And yet, even after I walked away, he never really left my thoughts. I carried him with me, like a shadow trailing behind me through the years. I wondered how he was, where life had taken him. I wondered if he thought of me, even for a fleeting moment. But I told myself it didn't matter. I had made my bed, and now I had to lie in it. So, I did. Life went on. I threw myself into my studies, my career, and every opportunity that came my way. I became fiercely independent, determined to prove to myself, more than anyone else, that I didn't need anyone. That I was enough on my own. And yet, there were moments when I couldn't help but wonder, what if? What if I hadn't pushed him away? What if I had let myself be vulnerable, let myself believe that I was worthy of love? Would things have been different? Would I have been different? But those thoughts were fleeting, and I pushed them aside. Regret is a heavy thing to carry, and I had no intention of letting it weigh me down. So, I buried those feelings deep, convincing myself that I had moved on. And then, one day, I found out he had moved on too. He got married. He had children. When I heard the news, I felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness, relief, and an ache I couldn't quite name. I was happy for him, truly. He deserved happiness, and I hoped he had found it. But there was also a lingering sadness for what could have been. For the life we might have shared, had things been different. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I had no right to feel this way. He had moved on, and so should I. But the truth was, I never fully did. Years passed, and my career flourished. I built a life for myself, a life filled with accomplishments, accolades, and success. But my personal life? That was a different story. There were relationships, sure, but none of them lasted. None of them felt right. It always felt like something was missing. Like I was searching for something or someone I couldn't quite name. After a few failed relationships, I started to accept that maybe this was my fate. Maybe I was destined to be alone. I told myself it was a consequence of my choices, that I had sacrificed love for my career, and this was the price I had to pay. Again, I thought, this is my bed. I have to lie in it. I tried to make peace with it. I convinced myself that I was okay with being alone. I had built a successful career, a comfortable life. I had friends, hobbies, a sense of independence that I cherished. What more did I need? But deep down, there was always that lingering ache. That quiet voice in the back of my mind whispering, what if? What if I hadn't walked away? What if I had fought for him, for us? But those thoughts were dangerous, I told myself. Pointless. There was no use dwelling on the past. The past was gone, and he was gone with it. Or so I thought. Because then, after almost 2 decades, he came back into my life. Out of nowhere, without warning, he slid into my DMs. At first, I couldn't believe it. I stared at the message, my heart pounding in my chest. It was surreal, like a ghost from the past had suddenly reappeared, bringing with it all the emotions I thought I had buried long ago. I told myself not to read too much into it. He's happily married, I thought. He probably doesn't even think of me that way anymore. But then, as the conversation unfolded, I realized just how wrong I was. He told me that I had never left his mind. Not once. Not in all these years. And suddenly, everything I thought I knew came crashing down. The past I had tried so hard to move on from, the feelings I had buried, it all came rushing back with a force I wasn't prepared for. I was stunned. Speechless. How could this be real? It felt like a dream, a beautiful, impossible dream. But it was real. He was real. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I allowed myself to hope. Fast forward nearly 19 years, and suddenly, he slid into my DMs. I stared at my phone, frozen, reading his message over and over again. His name. His words. It felt surreal, like a memory pulled from a dusty corner of my mind, a piece of my past resurrected after lying dormant for so long. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was imagining things, if my mind was playing some cruel trick on me. But there it was, his message. Real. Tangible. Alive. My initial reaction was confusion. Why now? What is this about? He's happily married, isn't he? Why would he be thinking of me? I couldn't wrap my head around it. I never thought I crossed his mind, not once in all these years. I had made peace with the idea that I was a distant memory, a fleeting part of his youth, long forgotten amid the life he had built for himself. Marriage. Children. A family. A life that had nothing to do with me. But the words on the screen told a different story. As our conversation unfolded, my heart began to race with a mixture of disbelief, hope, and guarded caution. He told me that I had never left his thoughts. That even after all these years, I was still there in the back of his mind, lingering like a melody he couldn't quite forget. I was stunned. All this time, I thought I had been the only one carrying the weight of what if. But no. He had been carrying it too. We both had. For nearly 2 decades, we had both been living parallel lives, haunted by the same unspoken question, what could have been? It was a bittersweet realization. There was comfort in knowing I wasn't alone in my regret, but there was also sadness in the years we had lost. Years spent apart. Years we could never get back. And yet, I couldn't help but feel skeptical. Why now? Why reach out after all this time? I wasn't naive. I knew that people don't just reappear out of the blue without a reason. So, I asked him, cautiously, why he had reached out. What had changed? That's when he told me about his marriage. It hadn't been what it seemed from the outside. What I had assumed was a happy, stable life was far from it. His marriage, he admitted, had been controlling and suffocating. For years, he had felt trapped, unable to be himself, unable to even have social media or connect with people from his past. But now, things were different. He had recently separated, and for the first time in years, he was free to reach out. He told me that he had thought about me often over the years. That he had wondered how I was, where life had taken me. And now that he could, he wanted to see if I was okay. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to be overjoyed to embrace this moment as fate, destiny, whatever you want to call it. But another part of me was cautious. I couldn't ignore the timing. He was newly separated. His life was in upheaval. Was he reaching out to me because he truly missed me? Or was I a comfort, a safe place to land in the midst of his chaos? I told myself to be careful, to protect my heart. But then, we started talking, every day, and suddenly, I couldn't help but hope. We talked about everything: our lives, our dreams, our regrets. It felt like no time had passed at all, like we were picking up right where we left off all those years ago. There was an ease to our conversations, a familiarity that felt both comforting and exhilarating. And beneath it all, there was that undeniable connection. That pull. It didn't take long for our conversations to turn into plans. We decided to meet in person. I was nervous. After all, it had been nearly 2 decades. People change. Lives change. What if the spark we felt through messages didn't translate to real life? What if we had romanticized our connection, built it up into something it wasn't? But the moment I saw him, all those doubts melted away. It was him. The same boy I had fallen for all those years ago. Now a man. There was a warmth in his eyes, a softness in his smile. And when he hugged me, it felt like coming home. That meeting sparked the beginning of something I hadn't allowed myself to believe in for a long time: a relationship. A real, tangible relationship. But I was cautious. I entered into it with trepidation, my guard still firmly in place. After all, I had been here before, vulnerable, hopeful, only to end up heartbroken. I wasn't going to make the same mistake again. I wasn't going to push him away out of fear. But I wasn't going to let my guard down completely either. Not yet. Over time, though, that caution began to fade. We met every few weeks, stealing moments of happiness in the midst of his messy divorce. It wasn't perfect. We didn't live nearby, and the distance wasn't easy. But we made it work. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be it. That after all these years, we were getting our second chance. But then, things started to change. His divorce grew messy, more complicated. The stress began to weigh on him, and slowly, I could feel him pulling away. At first, it was subtle: a missed message here, a delayed response there. But over time, it became more noticeable. Communication became sporadic. The daily messages turned into weekly check-ins. And I could feel him retreating further and further into himself. I tried to be patient. I knew he was going through a lot. But it was hard not to feel the sting of his absence. We had talked about this before, about how he tends to shut down when things get tough. He had warned me, told me that if I ever felt him pulling away, I should push myself into his head. That I should remind him I was there, that I wasn't going anywhere. So, I did. I kept reaching out, even when he didn't respond right away. I didn't want him to think I had given up on him. I didn't want to repeat the pattern of walking away just because things had gotten hard. But the more I reached out, the more he seemed to withdraw. Weeks turned into months, and still, I held on. I told myself that this was just a rough patch, that he was dealing with the fallout of his marriage, and once things settled, he would come back. That we would find our way back to each other. I told myself to be patient, to give him space, to trust that he would reach out when he was ready. Then, one night, I sent him a message. I told him that I didn't want to walk away just because things were hard. That I believed in us. That I didn't want to give up. His response was brief. He said he needed to sort out the mess, the divorce. I acknowledged his message and left it at that. I didn't press. I didn't push. I thought, he knows where I am if he wants to talk. But deep down, I could feel the distance growing. And then, a few days later, I woke up to discover that I had been blocked. Blocked. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. My heart stopped for a moment as I stared at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. He had shut me out completely, no explanation, no warning. Just silence. It felt like a knife in my heart. All the hope, all the dreams of a second chance, shattered in an instant. I sat there, staring at my phone, tears streaming down my face, trying to make sense of it. Why? Was it something I did? Something I said? Had I pushed too hard? Or was this just his way of protecting himself? I tried to tell myself it wasn't personal, that his behavior was a reaction to the stress he was under. But being blocked, that felt personal. That felt deliberate. And the pain of it was almost unbearable. I don't know how to deal with this. The weight of those words sits heavy in my mind, looping endlessly. Every time I close my eyes, I see his name, his messages, and then nothing. Just silence, like he disappeared into thin air, leaving me with nothing but questions. I replay everything in my head, searching for signs, moments where I could have done something differently. Did I miss something? Did I say the wrong thing? Was it me? I'm trying to convince myself that his behavior isn't about me. That it's a reaction to the chaos in his life, a temporary retreat into his shell because he's overwhelmed, lost, and drowning in the fallout of a broken marriage. But being blocked, that feels like a rejection so personal, it cuts deeper than any words could. It's a severing, a shutting out. It's him saying, I can't even bear to see you. And that feels like a knife in my heart. I'm not sure what hurts more, the suddenness of it, or the fact that deep down, I always knew this implosion was coming. I've been bracing myself for it from the start. I felt it in the way he carried himself, in the way he spoke about his life always teetering on the edge of collapse, like a delicate piece of glass, beautiful but fragile. I knew that one wrong move, one crack, could shatter him. And still, I stayed. I treated him with caution, pushing my own feelings to the side, afraid that if I let myself feel too much or expect too much, it would be too much for him to handle. But now I'm left wondering if that was my mistake. Did I push too hard, or not hard enough? Did I misunderstand what he needed from me? I always knew he had a tendency to retreat when things got hard. He warned me about it, told me how he shuts down when overwhelmed. But I thought I understood. I thought I was prepared to weather the storm with him, to hold on when he pulled away, to wait patiently for him to come back. But now that he's gone, completely gone, I'm left questioning everything. Was I not understanding enough? Was there something I missed? Did I do something to push him away? These thoughts consume me, day and night. The silence is deafening, and in that silence, my mind fills with every possible scenario. I think about our last conversations, dissecting every word, every pause, every emoji. I wonder if there was a moment, a tipping point, where I could have changed the outcome, where I could have held him closer instead of letting him slip away. But even as I spiral through these doubts, there's something inside me that refuses to let go. Something deep in my gut that tells me this isn't over. It's not an image I'm forcing. It's not some fantasy I've concocted to comfort myself. It's a feeling, a quiet, steady certainty that we will find our way back to each other. That this story isn't finished. And yet, I know how that sounds. I know it sounds foolish. I know it sounds delusional. Because when I look at things objectively, the facts are clear. He hasn't treated me with the respect I deserve. He pulled away when things got hard. He blocked me without explanation, leaving me in the dark. Objectively, he's shown me that I'm not a priority in his life right now. And I'm not blind to that. I see it. I acknowledge it. But still, there's that gut feeling. It's maddening. This contradiction between my head and my heart. My head tells me to move on, to let him go. To see his actions for what they are, a sign that he's not ready, that he's not capable of being the partner I deserve right now. But my heart refuses to believe that this is the end. It whispers to me, softly but persistently, that this is just a chapter in our story. That he'll come back, when he's ready, when he's healed. Am I delusional for holding on to that hope? I don't know. But what I do know is that hope can be both a blessing and a curse. It keeps you going, keeps you believing in possibilities. But it also keeps you tethered to something or someone that might never come to fruition. I think about all the stories we've been told about love. The grand gestures, the fairy tale endings, the idea that true love always finds a way. But what those stories don't tell you is how to navigate the gray areas. How to know when to hold on and when to let go. How to distinguish between patience and self-betrayal. Because that's what I'm wrestling with now. Where's the line between being patient with someone who's going through a hard time and teaching them that it's okay to treat you like you don't matter? Where's the line between believing in someone's potential and ignoring the reality of their actions? I don't want to be the kind of person who gives up on someone at the first sign of trouble. I've walked away before, and I've lived with the regret of wondering what could have been if I had stayed. I don't want to make that mistake again. But I also don't want to be the kind of person who sacrifices their own self-worth for the sake of someone else's chaos. So, where does that leave me? Heartbroken? Confused? Holding on to hope, even when hope feels like a foolish thing to hold on to. And what makes it harder is that I can still see the version of us that could be. The life we could build together, the happiness we could share. It's not just a fantasy. It's a vision that feels real. Tangible. Within reach, if only he could get out of his own head and see it too. But that's the thing about hope, it's not enough on its own. It takes two people to build a relationship. Two people to fight for it. Two people to choose each other, again and again, even when things get hard. And right now, I'm the only one fighting. The only one holding on. And that's a painful realization. I keep thinking about something he once said to me, that he felt broken. That he wasn't sure if he could be the man I needed him to be. At the time, I brushed it off, telling him that I didn't need him to be perfect. I just needed him to be present, to try. But now, I wonder if he was trying to warn me. If he was telling me, in his own way, that he wasn't ready to be the partner I deserved. Maybe he knew he would retreat. Maybe he knew he would shatter, just like I feared. And now, I'm left with the pieces. I keep telling myself that his behavior is a reflection of his own struggles, his own pain. That it's not about me. But it's hard not to take it personally when you've given someone your heart, only for them to disappear without a word. It feels personal. It feels like rejection. It feels like abandonment. But then, there's that gut feeling again. It refuses to be silenced, no matter how much my mind tries to shut it down. It tells me to be patient. To wait. To trust that the connection we share is real, and that he'll come back when he's ready. But how long do I wait? How long do I hold on to hope before it becomes self-destruction? How long do I keep the door open before I realize that I'm the only one standing on this side of it? I don't know the answers. I wish I did. All I know is that I'm heartbroken. Heartbroken and confused. Torn between holding on and letting go. Trying to find a way to move forward without feeling like I'm abandoning someone that feels like a part of me. And through it all, I just keep asking myself the same questions. Was I not understanding enough? Was it something I did? Is it personal? Or is this just his way of coping with his own pain? And most importantly, am I delusional to think that things will work out? That we'll find our way back to each other once he's sorted through his mess? Because no matter how much my head tries to convince me otherwise, my heart keeps whispering the same thing. This isn't the end. I've read enough stories and heard enough tales to know that when someone claims they've been in a controlling relationship, you have to take it with a grain of salt. There are always two sides. No marriage breaks down because of one person alone. I know that. I've told myself that over and over again. But I also know what he told me, and more than that, I know what I felt when I was with him. His words, his mannerisms, they all painted the picture of a man who was tired. A man who had been worn down, bit by bit, over time. A man who was only just keeping it together, piece by fragile piece. And that's what breaks my heart the most. Because I saw it. I saw him. The cracks, the weight he carried, the exhaustion behind his smiles. When we were together, it wasn't just the way he spoke about his life that told me he was struggling. It was in the way he touched me, the way he held me. There was a tenderness there, a desperation almost, as if he was clinging to something real, something safe. And I wanted to be that safe space for him. I wanted to be the person who made him feel whole again. But now I'm left wondering if I tried too hard to be that person. If I made excuses for behavior that I shouldn't have. If I ignored red flags in the name of patience and compassion. And yet, despite everything, despite the pain of being blocked, despite the unanswered questions, I can't bring myself to believe that he reached out to me with malicious intent. I don't believe that he set out to hurt me. I believe he was lost, confused, overwhelmed. I believe he's still trying to navigate a life he no longer recognizes. I believe he's doing the best he can, even if that best has hurt me deeply. But where do I draw the line? Where's the boundary between understanding someone's pain and allowing them to treat you poorly? I keep coming back to that question. Because the truth is, I don't want to close the door on him. Not completely. Not yet. I've spent years building walls around my heart, protecting myself from vulnerability and pain. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed those walls to come down for him. I let myself feel something real, something hopeful. I let myself imagine a future with him, a future where we both found happiness after years of regret and longing. And now that he's gone, it feels like slamming that door shut would be closing off that hope entirely. But at what cost to myself? There's a fine line between being patient and teaching someone that they can treat you like you don't matter. And I'm terrified that by holding on to hope, I'm crossing that line. I'm terrified that I'm sacrificing my self-respect in the name of love. And yet, I still can't shake that feeling. That gut feeling? It's maddening. I know, logically, that his actions speak louder than his words. I know that blocking someone without explanation is hurtful and dismissive. I know that if a friend were telling me this story, I'd tell her to move on, to respect herself enough to walk away from someone who couldn't even give her the courtesy of a goodbye. But it's different when it's your own heart on the line. Because love, real love, isn't always logical. It's messy and complicated and painful. And sometimes, it defies reason. I'm aware that the word love might sound fantastical, given that so many years have passed since we first knew each other. But love isn't always about time spent together. It's about connection. And I felt that connection with him, as if no time had passed at all. As if we were still those same two people, standing on the edge of something beautiful. But now I'm standing on that edge alone. So, what do I do? Do I cut him some slack? Do I give him time to sort through the mess of his life, trusting that he'll come back when he's ready? Or do I close the door for good, protecting myself from further heartache? I don't have the answer. I wish I did. All I know is that I'm heartbroken. Heartbroken and confused. I've spent so much time blaming myself for the choices I made when I was younger, for pushing him away out of fear, for not being brave enough to let myself be vulnerable. And now, I'm left wondering if I'm making the same mistake all over again. Am I pushing him away by holding on to my own hurt and expectations? Or am I finally learning to put myself first, to prioritize my own well-being over someone else's chaos? The truth is, I'm torn. On one hand, I want to be patient. I want to believe that love is worth fighting for, that people deserve grace when they're going through hard times. I want to believe that he'll come back, that we'll find our way back to each other once the dust has settled. But on the other hand, I'm exhausted. I'm tired of carrying the weight of hope on my shoulders. I'm tired of waiting for someone to choose me, tired of wondering if I'm enough. I'm tired of being the only one fighting for something that feels one-sided. And maybe that's the answer right there. Maybe love isn't supposed to feel this hard. Maybe love isn't about waiting for someone to sort through their mess before they're ready to fully show up. Maybe love is about being seen and valued, even in the midst of chaos. I don't want to be someone's afterthought. I don't want to be the person they turn to when everything else falls apart. I want to be chosen wholeheartedly, without hesitation, without conditions. So, maybe it's time to choose myself. Maybe it's time to let go of the version of him I've been holding on to the version who loves me deeply but is trapped by his circumstances. Maybe it's time to acknowledge that the person he is right now isn't capable of giving me the love I deserve. Because at the end of the day, I deserve more than sporadic communication and unanswered questions. I deserve more than silence and confusion. I deserve more than to be blocked without explanation. I deserve someone who shows up. Someone who chooses me, every day, without hesitation. So, maybe that's where the line is. Maybe the line between being patient and being treated poorly is recognizing your own worth. And maybe it's time for me to draw that line for myself. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe he'll come back. Maybe he won't. But what I do know is that I can't keep waiting for someone to save me from my own heartbreak. I have to save myself. If you've made it to the end of this, thank you. This is the abridged version of my story, but even in its brevity, it carries the weight of my heartache. I'm not looking for judgment or a lecture on what I should have done differently. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, but it doesn't change where I am now. I'm simply looking for kindness, for wisdom, for a reminder that I'm not alone in feeling this way. Because right now, I feel lost. Lost, but still holding on to the tiniest sliver of hope that I'll find my way again. And maybe, just maybe, that hope will start with me.